Welcome back, gang. Following me so far? Welcome back to your video textbook to ultimate home selling knowledge. Today in episode 1, we are digging around a little bit deeper into contract contingencies and the timelines surrounding them. Now remember, at this stage of the game, you have accepted an offer, but we are still going over potentially the contract contingencies, the timelines for them, and getting them nailed down and understood before you potentially sign a purchase and sales contract and obligate yourself to all of these things. So I guess we should start by defining what are contract contingencies. You can think of them as milestones, certain thresholds that are created by the contract language that need to be crossed over for the deal to continue, for the transaction to continue to the next step. These are created really for the benefit of both buyer and seller. They are ways to let the contract either continue or dissolve in an orderly fashion to protect the financial livelihoods of both parties. First up, obviously, is inspections, and the three main following are inspections, appraisals, and that final finance or mortgage contingency. So let's unpack the inspections first. Now, the inspection should be ordered and scheduled immediately after a signing of the purchase and sales contract. We want this inspection to happen right now. The inspection in Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Board of Realtors, is allotted 14 days or 10 business days. We need to take into account holidays potentially, for the buyer to conduct all of their inspections and negotiations and reach some sort of acceptable middle ground, if there needs to be any compromise between buyer and seller, on the results of those inspections and get them written into stone in the purchase and sales contract or an amendment to the purchase and sales contract before we can move on to the next step. So you, as a very diligent seller without no stinking realtor, you need to make sure you're cracking that whip. The second that we have an agreed set of terms on the purchase and sales, and we're going to make that signature, the same phone call telling the realtor or the buyer, hey, we accept, these are all the terms, you agree, great. Have you ordered your inspection yet? If you have not, please do so, and let's get it in. I'm completely open. We'll accommodate whatever time slot you need to make sure this happens really, really soon. From there, from that signature, they've got 14 days, 10 business days to conduct all of their inspections. Now, these are rather unlimited. We can give you some color on which ones are common, but understand that the buyer can do as many and whatever inspections they want to do within that 14-day window, as long as they're completing the negotiations for those inspections thereafter. Now, also understand that just because the standard purchase and sales agreement issued by the Rhode Island Board of Realtors allots 14 days or 10 business days doesn't mean you have to agree to that length of time. If you have a buyer that is really competitive with the other offers, but you really don't want to expose yourself to a full 10 to 14 days worth of inspections, you can request a shortened or truncated inspection window. Maybe the buyer would agree. Lots of times in the multiple offer situations these days, buyers are choosing to waive their inspections totally to compete with other bids. That's been the case historically in the last 2 or 3 years post-pandemic, but inspections are starting to make a comeback. Negotiations on those inspections are starting to make a comeback, and this is considering just Rhode Island and the surrounding Massachusetts, Connecticut markets. Could be completely different in your locality, so you need to understand the market structures and how people are reacting to them before you go asking a buyer to truncate their inspection period. It may end up killing your potential deal right there if you're asking for something that is completely out of the scope of reality. So take that into consideration. Now let's say we do get a truncated inspection period. Now that buyer needs to effect all of their inspections and any negotiations within a very much shorter period of time. It obviously is going to allow the seller a better circumstance, because how many inspections can you really do in 3 or 4 days if that's what you actually have agreed to? Moving on, let's talk about the commonplace inspections and how long they take, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously we have the structure and mechanical inspections. This is the general inspection that everybody is familiar with. This is going to go over all of the building systems, your roof, your structure, your heating system, your air conditioning system, your plumbing, any other mechanicals. You have a pool, you name it. The inspector is going to go over each one of these items and is going to give his commentary on them as to their soundness. Also, understand that these inspectors, they are not hired by you. They are not hired to give an impartial, or excuse me, they are hired to give an impartial third-party opinion on the soundness of anything that they lay their eyes on. They are not there to prescribe fixes. They're not there to calm people's nerves. They're not there to estimate the cost of repairs for any of these items. They're just there to point out problems. And clearly that becomes an issue if your buyer has cold feet or is, very light in the area of discretionary funds with which they might be able to do repairs if you refuse to as a seller. So understand what's happening in the inspection. If you're going to be there for the inspection, which you may need to be because you don't have no stinking realtor, you really need to keep a lid on your emotions and not go bananas every time this inspector is pointing out something faulty that you don't think is an actual problem. You need to kind of clam up, just make sure they have access to every available part of the home so that they can do their due diligence. And a little note on that, you really want them to have access to every part of the home. We've talked in previous episodes about removing question marks. When a buyer, especially those underfunded buyers, are doing a property inspection, they want as few question marks as possible. If you don't have the closet cleared out that has the attic scuttle above it so that the inspector can get up into the attic and take a look, it's a lingering question mark in the buyer's mind that's, are they hiding something up there? Is there a leak? Is there some mold? Et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you're acting in earnest and doing your best to give your buyer access to each part of your property so that they're not lingering on questions. Continuing on, we can have WDO, wood destroying organism inspections. We all know the common, powder post beetles and termites. This is a very common one. Mold inspections, septic inspections. If you don't have septic but you've got sewer, they can do scopes to make sure that the sewer line is appropriately open. If you have a well, they're going to be looking at the water production from that well per unit time and also the potability, the drinkability of that water, what chemicals are in it that may or may not want to be there. We don't want feces and other products that shouldn't be in groundwater and drinking water leaching into your well, so they're going to test that kind of thing. And many, many others. Radon, which is a radioactive gas that's naturally emitted in the ground, and some concretes, and also mold and things like that. So all these things need to take place. The buyer can do any of them, all of them, a few of them, but the most common are just the inspection, the mechanical inspection, maybe a wood destroying organisms and a mold inspection and a radon. Understanding the timelines for these inspections, they can take quite a bit of time to complete. 3 hours, 4 hours if you've got a big house just for that initial mechanical and structural inspection. Allot that amount of time to make sure, again, that your buyer doesn't leave with any question marks and everything is inspected as it should be. In terms of timeline for turnaround of that report, maybe 2 days, 48 hours in most cases for a talented inspector to turn around all of his notes and produce a report for the buyer's digestion. So we've got the inspection itself, 4 hours, 2 days allotted for the report to actually reach the buyer. Now, after those 2 days, you have the opportunity to most likely start negotiating with that buyer. They don't necessarily have to provide you the report. They can ask for repairs or credits to make repairs off the purchase price without necessarily giving you that report. It's going to be, again, up to you. Hey, I need to kind of substantiate the claims you're making here. I have no basis on which to understand that you're being truthful with your claims about my house. Can you provide me with the inspection report? Sometimes they'll just hand it over. Sometimes they're going to just give you snippets of the report that are going to substantiate their claims. If you get the whole report, also understand that you're going to have to disclose this information. Anything that you find in that report is now your knowledge, and according to real estate law, you are obligated and you do have a duty to disclose anything that you know about the property that would materially affect its value. So keep that in mind as well. A lot to understand here, but you don't need no stinking realtor. You got this all figured out. We'll help you. Moving on from inspections, if you have any questions about the validity of a request from a buyer about the inspections. Do I need the inspection report? Should I really be negotiating with this person based on this or that request for repair? Do I have to give them the money? Can I just say no? You know, these are all questions you would ask of your realtor, but if you haven't got one, go to your real estate attorney that you've already got on retainer, as we described in previous videos. Ask all those questions to make sure you're acting appropriately. Next up is the appraisal. So obviously, if you've got a cash buyer, appraisals aren't a thing. There's no bank involved. But if you do have a buyer that's looking for financing, the bank is going to want to make sure that they are not lending this buyer more money than the actual value of the home. So they're going to need to determine that. Now, your realtor, if we were involved, we're going to show up to the appraisal appointment with a packet that proves the value of the agreed price between buyer and seller based on comps, based on certain talking points regarding your home above and beyond the most close comp. We're going to make sure that we're doing our utmost to prove to this bank that the agreed price is, in fact, the value of the home or more. In the case that it doesn't appraise at value, though, understand that it's going to introduce potentially another opportunity for the buyer to negotiate the purchase price. It's up to you to make sure you have your due diligence done. You've got all your other buyers sitting in the wings. You've made careful notes. You can go back to them if you need to, so that when this buyer starts asking for an arm and a leg, you can negotiate confidently, saying like, no, I've got a lot of other buyers that are interested in this home. I'll give you this, that, or the other, but I'm not going to give you all of blah, 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 blah. This is what your realtor would do for you. So it's up to you to do that. Not only are you required to do your own negotiations, but again, you're gonna want to crack that whip on the timeline. Again, we're talking about timelines here. So the inspection takes 2 weeks, 14 days. The appraisal will also take about that long to schedule, complete the appraisal, receive the appraisal back to learn the value of the home in the eyes of the bank. Is it at value? Is it at the agreed purchase price, more or less, etc. Now, buyers and buyers' agents would love to wait until they have crossed the inspection contingency threshold before ordering the appraisal. Why? Is because they all cost money. So if we're spending $700 to $1,000 as a buyer or the buyer's agent on an inspection, we want to make sure that we are not going to spend more money on an appraisal if the deal isn't going to survive the inspection process in the first place. So they would want to wait. But you, Mr. and Mrs. Diligent Seller, you do not want to wait. There is a very good reason that you want the appraisal to happen immediately after executing the purchase and sales contract, just like the inspection. And that is because if the deal is going to go sour on the inspection or if the deal is going to go sour on the appraisal, you want to know as soon as humanly possible, because you either have to go back to the market with your house, you have to put it back on the market to attract new buyers, or you've got to go back to your very carefully curated list of buyers and try to get one of them back in contract without having to go back to the market. Obviously, if you have to put the house back in the market after already having been in contract for a few days or a few weeks, the optics of that look bad. Now buyers in the market are wondering what went wrong. Now there's disclosure issues. They're asking you what went on in the inspection, et cetera, et cetera. It's not the best circumstance and one you'd like to avoid. So crack that whip. Again, first phone call, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, we accept, here are the terms. This is what is going to go on with inspection. This is what's going on with the appraisal. We want them both ordered immediately, and we'd very much like you to prove that those have been ordered in a timely fashion. Do they have to comply? Not necessarily, but you can do your best to badger them as much as you can to make this happen. Now, not all contracts and not all buyers necessitate an appraisal contingency. A lot of the time, especially with conventional buyers, there isn't necessarily an appraisal contingency. There's a mortgage contingency. The buyer obviously must get funding from a lending institution to be able to close on your property and actually purchase it. But if the property doesn't appraise, it's not an automatic, hey, this deal's off and Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you get off scot-free, here's your deposit back. That has to be sometimes written into the contract by the buyer's agent, so pay attention to this as well. If you have a buyer that doesn't have a very diligent buyer's agent on their side and got into contract with you without, or is proposing to get into contract with you without an appraisal contingency, kind of beneficial. Now, speaking about real estate attorneys, we want to also touch on the reality of the American justice jurisprudence system, and specifically the fact that it's all about money, guys. Just because it says something on paper doesn't mean the buyer is going to follow the instructions or follow the covenants of that contract. So follow me, if you will. You've got a $2,000 earnest money deposit on your purchase and sales agreement. That buyer is only committed for $2,000. Their buyer's agent forgets to write in the appraisal contingency. Appraisal comes back undervalued. The house isn't worth as much as buyer and seller agreed in the eyes of the bank. It introduces a new negotiation point for that buyer, as we've described. Buyer says, I'll pay as much as the appraisal. You say, no, that's $20,000 less than we agreed to. You need to come up with the extra cash. Buyer says, well, it didn't appraise, so I get to walk. And you say, well, no, your realtor did not write in the appraisal contingency, so you're obligated to close on this at the agreed price, regardless of the fact that the bank didn't want to give you as much money as you wanted. The buyer can say, okay, sue me, because they've only got $2,000 skin in the game. So they can either just let the $2,000 slide, or you can sue them to close, and all you've really got in recompense is that $2,000 deposit. The reality is you're not going to spend a whole bunch of money paying an attorney to sue somebody to close on your house for, a $2,000. The buyer's just going to walk, right? So understand earnest money deposit's a little bit better, as we described in previous videos. We want a nice chunky piece of skin in the game for that buyer to prevent these sorts of things and to give you the leverage you need in a negotiation to get what you want. All right, moving on. 2 weeks, as we described, the appraisal comes back. Hopefully it's at value or more. If it's not, then you get the opportunity to renegotiate, or the buyer gets the opportunity to renegotiate. FHA buyers, VA buyers, and a host of others, they will have an automatic appraisal contingency. If the house is not appraised, the deal's dead. Now, with that conventional buyer, if you then come up with a compromise, they put up a little bit more cash, you come down a little bit on the purchase price, now we can move forward, then comes the mortgage contingency. So they actually have to now, once the property has survived the appraisal and we've gotten the appraisal at value, now the bank does their actual underwriting process and proves to themselves that this buyer is in fact bankable, is in fact credit worthy for this money. And that is typically somewhere between 30 and 60 days from execution of the purchase and sales contract, when the mortgage commitment from the bank actually comes in, and the clear to close, which is, hey, we've done our underwriting process, this buyer is credit worthy, but now we need to cross our I's and dot our T's and get ourselves ready to actually close. That's the clear to close. That comes, generally speaking, somewhere between 1 and 2 weeks after the mortgage commitment is issued. So now you've got 18 to 20 minutes worth of knowledge that you need to absorb to become the ultimate home selling guru expert. Hope you liked. In the next episode, we're going to go over the nuance involved in all of these negotiations, but you've already got that covered because you don't need no stinking realtor. We'll see you on the next episode, and we'll talk more about it.